Yes, indeedy, folks. It's the Beer Drinker's Guide to the Great Wahoo. Let's drive Moab. The last couple of weeks we've been taking a look at the drive I took down to Moab. This was in the spring of 2007. And yesterday we went on a little drive down Highway 279 going down the Colorado River. Since I got into Moab early, I thought, well, before I go find my hotel, I will just go check out a little bit of this amazing country. We saw the river. We started off on a little dirt road that we decided, I think I'll wait and think about taking this road in the future. You may remember I decided not to take this road, and I pointed out that I was glad that I hadn't taken it. We'll be looking at a little bit more of that road here later today and more next week. On our drive down the river, we also caught lots and lots of amazing rock formations. After meandering around the river for a while, I drove into Moab, got to the far end of Moab, and found my motel, the beautiful Redstone Inn, right on the main highway. Yes, indeedy, folks, it's Moab's best deal. Beautiful room 202 is very nicely wooded paneled, has a window that's too high to look out of. You can get a good view of the overhang that's outside though. It features a lovely little kitchenette with just enough room to keep some beer cold, and I think I did manage to brew a pot of coffee. It features the obligatory map of the area. And of course, a lovely poster of Canyonlands. In the Utah deserts, you do not even need to go on dirt roads to get dust on your car. But I had been on a bit of a dirt road, and the next day I woke up to find that there had been just a light sprinkling of April rain, and it had certainly pointed out the dust that was on the car. For my first day in Moab, I decided to go up and check out Highway 313. Takes off of Highway 191 about 9 miles before you get to Moab, coming from Boise. Highway 313 features 2 attractions. One is a Utah State Park, Dead Horse Point, 22 miles from where the Highway 313 leaves 191. And the other feature is Canyonlands National Park. I wasn't sure just how many of these I'd hit on this particular day, but I figured, well, I'll start somewhere. And once you start on Highway 313, you hit just exactly the kind of road that I like to be driving on. Look at those great curves going around that amazing countryside. It is pretty difficult to drive anywhere on Highway 313 and not have to stop and start taking pictures. was early April, a nice cool day, very pleasant. And throughout the day you saw these squalls all over the landscape. Quite often we were in squalls. Some of them were even snow. The annual rainfall is 10 inches per year, just about the same as Boise. Of course, they don't have the Boise River irrigating it like we do. And the summers are blistering hot. Shortly after you get into Dead Horse Park, there is a picnic and camping area. This is a little shot from there. As you approach the end of the road, you get to where you're looking out over the mesas and down into the valleys. And here we are approaching the reason this is called Dead Horse Park. As you can see where that vehicle is, there's a canyon on one side, and though you can't see it, I assure you there's a canyon directly on the other side. This narrow place in the plateau is called the Neck. It is 30 yards wide. One legend has it that the cowboys would herd wild horses, wild Mustangs, out onto this point across that narrow 30-yard wide neck. Once the Mustangs were across that narrow neck, they were in a corral. It was 2,000 feet down all the way around. There was no place that they could get away, and the cowboys would throw some sticks and brush across that narrow neck, and they had the Mustangs corralled. The legend of how Dead Horse Point got its name was that there was one time that they culled out the wild horses they wanted, and the cowboys that were doing it were very inconsiderate. They left this fence of sticks up. The horses could not get around the fence, and so the horses died of thirst in the heat, being able to look over the canyon walls and see and hear the Colorado River. Once we are on Dead Horse Point, we can look toward the south and the east. This is looking toward where Road 279, which we drove yesterday, is. The water that we see is not the Colorado River. These are the leaching ponds from the potash mine. Potash is mined here up on this mesa, and it is leached out through a water process, and then the finished product is shipped over to Highway 279, where we saw the big storage bins with the potash ready to be shipped out. I must admit that the Dead Horse Point had an eerie feeling about it. It's this chunk of rock that thrusts 2,000 feet up in the air, and you just kind of have a feeling that at any point it could decide to topple over. We continue on to the Dead Horse Point Overlook, which is a well-developed area. You can see that they have nice rock structures around the edges. Other than this rim and right where the fence was, there are no rock structures. You just walk out to the edge of these canyons, and they do suggest you be careful. This young man is looking at one of the main features that you can see from Dead Horse Point. And that feature is this huge oxbow that the Colorado River makes. This oxbow is so large that even highway maps will show the Colorado River making this bend. We are no longer looking south, we're looking more toward the west, and we'll be looking a little bit more toward the northwest. What we're looking at here is the Colorado River running through Canyonlands National Park. Remember the little dirt road that I started on and then decided not to finish driving? Well, that's it from Dead Horse Point. And do you remember that I said I ended up glad I didn't take this drive? Well, this is not the point where I decided that I was glad that I made that decision. That point comes a little later when we get into Canyonlands National Park. And that concludes today's exciting drive around Moab, Utah, taking Highway 313 out to Dead Horse Point. Last week we had our big celebration of the summer solstice. At that time I promised we'd be looking into what causes the summer solstice. What's with that darn time lag between when we have the most light and when we have the most heat? And a little look at the sun's contribution to our concept of there only being one God. Well, that beer-drinking guide of yours babbled so much about what causes solstice and equinox, we didn't get to the last two. So, now, let's look into what's with that time lag between when it's light and when it gets hot. The longest day of the year, the day with the most light falling on the earth, the day with the most energy falling on the earth, is June 21st, or right around there. And yet the hottest day of the year is way over in July and August. It just keeps getting warmer and warmer. The other side of that is that during the shortest day of the year, on December 21st, we are not in the coldest part of the year. The coldest part of the year happens in January and February. So what's up with that action anyway? To understand the lag between getting the most energy from the sun and getting the hottest days of the year, and the lag from having the shortest day of the year and then the cold coming after that, we have to understand the principle of a heat sink. A heat sink, of course, is where you go to pour all the heat. It's very simple. I don't know why people make such a big deal about this. Or, if you prefer a more, shall we say, scientific explanation, let's think about something where we create a lot of heat but don't want it to travel, shall we? Let's take a welder, for instance. This is going to be an exaggerated example, but in welding and soldering, you are working with very high heats. The same is true in other applications. Computers, the processor creates a lot of heat, and we want to get rid of that heat so that it doesn't hurt other components that are close to it. So in our extreme example, let's say you were welding on a piece of steel that was connected to a computer chip, which you wanted to protect from getting all this heat to it. Well, steel conducts heat rather efficiently, but there are metals that conduct it even more efficiently. Copper is one of them. Gold is very good at it, but not very often used simply because of the fact that it's gold. So let's say that we take a strip of copper. We take this copper, attach it to the piece of steel that is carrying the heat to the chip, and because copper carries heat more efficiently and quickly than steel does, the heat is drawn away from the chip. If we are going to be continuing to weld or create a lot of heat, we would put a sink like a large piece of copper, or a radiator with a fan blowing on it, or anything that will continue to draw that heat away from the chip, or away from any other delicate thing that we do not want to have damaged by heat. And that is what we call a heat sink. We sink the heat away from what we do not want it to be, and the heat sink absorbs the warmth. Of course, the reverse could be true. It could be a cold sink. We are actually drawing cold away. Now, folks, let's consider this amazing Earth of ours. The Earth weighs 13,200,000,000,000,000,000,000. Well, it's a heck of a lot of zeros, pounds. In fact, I cannot even think of what that many zeros is called. I can count. I know what hundreds are, and thousands, and millions, and billions, and trillions. But this is 4 whole question marks of things I don't even know what they're called. Is it quadrillions? Is it quadruple billion, mega billions? Is it hexamegamills? Well, believe me, I don't know what you call that number. So I went and did some research and found the proper name for that big a number. The proper name for that is, oh my gosh, that's a big number. And believe me, it's true. You've seen it here in print, so you know it's just got to be verified. So here we are on Earth, which weighs all those pounds of rock and water, mostly. Well, folks, if you want a big heat sink, I would think that the Earth would serve your purpose. So as the light increases and increases, the cold that is in the northern hemisphere gets a little bit warmer and a little bit warmer. All the water and all the rocks and all the mountains, the snow that was reflecting the heat and the light back into space is melting. As the snow melts, we no longer have the white of the snow reflecting light back into space. So what is exposed to the ground and the rocks start to absorb more heat. We continue to heat up this huge, huge heat sink called the Earth. That is why even after the sun starts to go to where we're not getting so much light every day, the heat of the Earth continues to absorb what sunlight is coming in and continues to become warmer and warmer. And that is why the warmest day of the year happens after the longest day of the year. And that is why the coldest days of the year happen after the shortest day of the year, because The cold has been gathering and gathering, the heat has been leaving the earth, and there's now no more warmth, and the sun is starting to return and eventually will heat the northern hemisphere back up. There is one interesting side to the concept of the heat sink of the earth, and that is that 5 feet down in the ground, the earth is always pretty stable in its temperature. That's why we can bury pipes 4.5 feet down and they don't freeze during the winter unless there's an extremely cold winter. Now, if you lived in North Dakota or if you lived in Alaska, you would probably want to bury your pipes a little further than that. But here in the 45th parallel, where we have a pretty temperate climate, 4.5 feet is good. But you go down 5 feet or 6 feet in the earth, almost anywhere, and the earth is such a huge heat sink that it almost always is a constant temperature year-round. One effect of that is when you drill a well or when you're getting water out of a spring, anytime that you have water coming from the earth, the temperature of that water is the average temperature of the surface of the earth in that spot. Here in Boise, we average basically between, say, 0 and 110. Well, the temperature of the water out of wells around here is 55 degrees. Pretty well anywhere you go in the world, if you measure the water coming out of the earth, what you get is the average temperature from that space throughout the year on the surface. A fascinating little point. And now for a little celebration of SOB, the sights of Boise. I'm shocked that you would think your beer drinking guide would be talking about that other thing you were thinking of. This is Sand Creek. You can see that it is bordered by stones on the side that were placed many years ago when they were channeling this creek through town. Sand Creek is the stream that comes out of the Boise Hills, goes down through what used to be called Slaughterhouse Gulch, and is now known as the Highlands. But this is not the Highlands end of Sand Creek. This is down after it's past Lowell Grade School and is heading toward the Boise River. Years after this creek was channeled, and at the same time many years before now, there were a bunch of young kids who decided the very best thing to do would be to ride their bikes down the left-hand side between that fence and the creek. Of course, there's no reason to ride your bike in a dangerous situation unless you're riding it just as fast as you possibly can. One of these kids was named Jack, and Jack was just the kind of guy that you can't help but like. In fact, 50 years later, I'm still liking Jack. Jack's front tire hit a rock, twisted his steering, Jack went over the handlebars and preceded his bicycle. Jack was going face first into Sand Creek and into that wall on the far side of Sand Creek. I can still see him reaching out his hand to stop his fall, and I can still remember thinking, well, we might be taking Jack to the morgue. Fortunately, my worries were relieved when Jack just kind of picked himself up, looked at the scratch on his arm, and got back on his bike, and we headed on down Sand Creek. I was out riding my bike at a much slower pace. And a little ways after taking that picture of Sand Creek for good old time's sake, I noticed these two kids playing around under the bridge. They were having a good time seeing how fast they could go, and suddenly my memory went right back to that time with Jack. I asked them if they would mind my taking a little movie of their antics, and they said, nah, that would be great. So here we have Hayden and then Gage enjoying themselves on a beautiful summer afternoon. And I do have to warn you, the river was running high and making a lot of background noise. Boys and bikes and summer. May we pass on the great wahoo forever. A married couple go to his class reunion. There were the usual cast of characters there, carrying on like reunion folk do. But out of the whole bunch of them, there was one gal that really stood out. This gal was really tying one on. She was hooping and hollering and making a scene of herself. The wife asked her husband, "Ray, do you know who that girl is?" And Ray answered, "Oh, yes, indeed I do. That's Gladys. She and I were high school sweethearts. I understand that right after I broke up with her, she took to the bottle and she hasn't been sober since." "My God," his wife replied. "Who would think a person could go on celebrating that many years?" And that music means we've come to the end of yet another Beer Drinker's Guide to the Great Wahoo. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you next week when we will go drive the Canyonlands National Park. We'll finally get around to seeing what the sun has to do with the concept of there only being one God. And, as usual, your beer drinking guide will probably find something else to babble about. In the meantime, keep celebrating the Great Wahoo.